that. I really very much appreciate all the kind words, but let's get one thing straight. There are no questions about the pecking order here. Tom Woods is the legend, and I don't care what he says, he's the best communicator we have, and a guy who I've learned a ton from, and just one of the best people I know. And even better now with Jenna. Love Jenna, Tom Woods. That's the best. He curses every now and then. I feel like he might punch somebody. I don't know. I like it. Okay, so what I want to talk to you guys about is more or less, my vision for the Libertarian Party, what I think libertarians should be, and why I am so excited about the future for the Libertarian Party. And I mean the very near future for the Libertarian Party. It's unbelievable what we can accomplish. And one of the main reasons really has nothing to do with what we've done. And I'm not trying to discount or downplay any of the great work that we've done, because this is a really incredible party. This is the party of Ron Paul and Harry Brown, and we should all be proud to continue in this legacy. But the main reason why the Libertarian Party has such an incredible opportunity right now in this country has nothing to do with any of that. The reason why we have an unbelievable opportunity is because every major institution in America has been completely discredited. Their support has evaporated. This is an unbelievable moment that we're living in, where there is a real possibility that we can get in here and convince large swaths of the American public that we've got something to say, because we do. And they know all of the opinion voters have nothing to say. So I think the question that we ought to ask ourselves is a question that I heard Tom Woods pose at a speech years ago. I think this speech was in 2012, about 10 years ago if I remember. And Tom made the point, he posed the question, he said, here's what libertarians need to think. If we could grab the entire world by the ears, if we had a bullhorn loud enough for everyone to hear us, what would we want them to hear? What would we want to say to them? What would persuade you if you were that person who had never heard about this before? And I would submit two examples that I think are the absolute best of best moments in libertarian history, at least of libertarians talking about libertarian things. Number one is the Ron Paul Giuliani moment. What was so amazing about that moment, and why if you talk to people who are, say, 40 and under, a huge percentage of them were introduced to our ideas through this moment. And what was so incredible about the Ron Paul Giuliani moment was that, and people forget this, because we now think back of it as like this amazing thing where Ron Paul just schooled Giuliani. But Ron Paul lost that moment. He won the bigger picture. But Ron Paul, do you remember how thunderous the applause were when Rudy Giuliani called out Ron Paul? Yeah. It was the largest applause of the entire night. That entire arena, that entire theater was against Ron Paul. And in fact, they were so against Ron Paul that Giuliani got a little bit drunk in that moment of how much, right? Because he goes, I've never heard anything like this, which is, kind of embarrassing, because Ron Paul was literally stating the reasons that Osama bin Laden stated for the 9/11 attacks, but Giuliani bragged that he's never heard this. And then he goes, I've heard some absurd explanations for 9/11, but I've never heard anything this absurd. Thunderous applause. Giuliani then is like, whew, I'm killing with this crowd. And he oversteps. And it was one of the greatest things that ever happened to the libertarian movement, to the liberty movement in general. He oversteps and he demands that Ron Paul apologize and say he didn't really mean that, to which he gets another round of thunderous applause. And then it comes back over to Ron Paul. And Ron Paul's first words were, "I very sincerely believe." And then he went on to give his whole, history lecture of what happened. But that was his response. In the moment, in the pocket, as the crowd hates you. And he responded, "I very sincerely believe." And then he said, "I very sincerely believe that the CIA was correct when they teach and talk about blowback, and gave a history of the intervention in Iran and how that led and everything. And then he demonstrated that he really knew something and knew what he was talking about. Okay, that's number one. Number two is a piece written by Harry Brown called "When Will We Learn?" And it is one of the greatest pieces that you can ever read. If you haven't read it, I demand you go home and read it tonight. It's incredible. Now that piece was all about what led to the 9/11 attacks, a similar point that Ron Paul was making. And the piece is incredible. It's about, American interventionist foreign policy, how many innocent people we've killed, and how this created so much hatred for us. And the piece is great. It's very well written, it's accurate, it's correct. But the truth is, what's amazing about that piece is not really the content. I mean, it's great, but Tom has written articles like that, Ron Paul has written pieces like that, Rothbard, Lou Rockwell, a lot of great libertarians have written pieces with a similar argument. What's amazing, for people who know this piece that I'm talking about, it's the freaking date at the top.
Yes.
That punches you in the stomach. The date is September 12th, 2001.
Yep.
That's what's amazing about it. That he wrote this in the most difficult time to deliver this message. Now, I would submit that libertarians, really the most important thing we have is our message.
Yep.
It's not as if we wield a lot of political power. I mean, I know here in Pennsylvania, a lot of people like to boast that this is the most successful libertarian state where we have the most elected, libertarians, and that's great. I think that's wonderful. Like, I think if you can get a libertarian dog catcher, get a libertarian dog catcher in there. But let's also be honest. It's not as if we wield a tremendous amount of political power in Pennsylvania. Okay? So we don't really have true political power. And perhaps the dichotomy is that we don't really want it. I mean, we'd like to use it to roll back the power, but regardless, the fact is we don't have much of it. So what we have is our message. And what is most important when you have your message is to say the truth when it is most difficult. And that's why the Harry Brown piece is so incredible. And that's what I would encourage us to focus on. That's when we are at our most useful. That's when we can do the most important thing, is when we say what is the most important truth to say, when you know you're going to take all of the arrows for saying it. And that's what libertarians do at their best, okay? And we have really seen over the last couple of years many opportunities, if you really believe in liberty, to say an important truth that's really going to get you in a lot of trouble, might even hurt your livelihood, might get you banned off social media, and will certainly be guaranteed to get you called every name that I get called every day on Twitter. But if we're not willing to do that, then I would submit the question, what's the point of us? Why are we here? And right now, we're living through a major one of these moments when everybody in the corporate press has decided that the only thing that is appropriate to say is that Vladimir Putin is indistinguishable from Adolf Hitler, and that he is so wrong, and Ukraine is so right, and oh my God, what could have led to this? And Joe Biden, declared in his State of the Union that Vladimir Putin led a, quote, unprovoked attack.
Yeah.
Now, I would say this to you, okay? If we understand that all of the trust in institutions has collapsed and evaporated, all of the trust in CNN and the New York Times and the Washington Post is gone. People have nothing but contempt for these people because they've been wrong about everything in the 21st century. Perhaps in these moments, our best strategy is not to sound exactly like CNN and the New York Times and the Washington Post. Perhaps it's to sound like Harry Brown and Ron Paul and tell the truth, which that is absolutely absurd to claim. Listen, Vladimir Putin invading Ukraine is horrific and it's inexcusable, but it is just not true that it is unprovoked. That is a big fat lie. There has been nothing but provocation since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And our best minds, even within the national security apparatus, have been warning about this. Colonel Douglas Macgregor has been warning that we're provoking Russia for 30 years. This isn't just something that libertarians say, but you don't think that moving a military alliance up to another country's border is a provocative act? You don't think sending in weapons to Ukraine after the Obama administration led a coup there is a provocation? We're supposed to pretend this is unprovoked? Maybe that's something that we need to stand up and say. Because to me, that's what Harry Brown would say, and that's what Ron Paul is saying right now, because thank God he's still with us. That's the most important thing Libertarians can point out. What do we want to do? We want to just come out here and sound like all of the discredited institutions? Why don't we say something brave and interesting that actually contributes something? Why don't we say that I actually don't think that the butchers of Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, and Yemen, and Somalia have any role in saving the people of Ukraine? About the current ongoing genocide in Yemen, all their hearts bleed for the people in Ukraine. Forgive me, but I don't fucking believe you for a second. I don't believe it. Why do I have to pretend that this is anything other than the sham that it is? Now, one of the other reasons why we in the Libertarian Party have an incredible opportunity is not only that it's, you know, like I came into the Liberty world from the Ron Paul campaigns. And what we had back then was, there was the level of trust in institutions, while it was deteriorating already, was nowhere near as, you know, it wasn't as low as it is now, or anywhere even close to that. Believe it or not, when I first became a libertarian, millions of Americans watched CNN every night. I know, it'll blow your mind. That was a thing. It was a thing that happened.
Lots more people at the airports then.
Well, they were, they didn't have a mask on or whatever, I don't know, maybe they could take it in. But no, but people actually did in much greater numbers watch these corporate shows and read the New York Times subscription numbers were way higher than they are now, and all of this. And so what the big obstacle for Ron Paul was that they would black him out. They would give it, he got all of his, attention from like a few minutes in the debates where he would say the most interesting thing that anyone was saying, and then that would generate a lot of enthusiasm online. That was really the strength of the Ron Paul campaigns, if you guys remember. It was all the internet stuff. But the internet wasn't nearly as big then as it is now. So now we're in a situation where the trust in the corporate press has evaporated, and now we have these alternative platforms, these podcasts and shows on the internet that are way bigger than the corporate press. So we don't need them anymore. We don't need to figure out how do we get into the presidential debates to spread our message. I say, screw that. We'll go on the biggest shows in the world that are happy to have us because they like interesting ideas. Yeah, maybe something like the Joe Rogan experience.
Yeah.
Go on it like 7 times, but who's counting? It's not about like how many times you do it. 7, 8 later this year. And the point is that we don't need to beg. We don't need to beg to be accepted to their club. I dream of a day when the Libertarian Party has created so much noise that they're begging us to be in the debates, and we'll say we'll see if we can squeeze you out. Yeah. That's the Libertarian Party I want to be a part of. So, as we have this moment, as we have this opportunity that's right in front of us, and I know, it's easy to say, well, like traditionally, third parties don't really do that much, they don't kick up that much dust in America. It's like, yeah, but traditionally, none of this other stuff happens either. And let's keep in mind how serious what we're up against is. Because I kind of remember during the 2008 Ron Paul campaign, or the 2012 Ron Paul campaign, I remember, Ron Paul was really sounding an alarm. He wasn't just saying, hey, I believe in this theory of liberty, and I believe that these wars are going very bad, and it's horrible, and it's immoral, and I believe... He was really saying, this system is unsustainable, and it's spinning out of control, and something very, very bad is coming. That was always right at the center of Ron Paul's message. And I was convinced by his arguments. But it was still somewhat of an abstraction to me at the time. And that's not true anymore. If you look at the situation with Ukraine and Russia, when you have nuclear armed powers, not Ukraine anymore, but of course America, nuclear armed powers with this crazy war propaganda, the rhetoric is insane. You're like, this is actually very dangerous. This isn't a game. This could very easily spin out of control. I mean, there were several points during the Cold War where nukes were almost launched. Don't think it's impossible that that can happen. And I mean, I would say that the number one priority in the history of humanity is that we don't go to nuclear war with Russia, between Russia and the United States. This is a very big deal. And aside from that being the biggest, but over the last 2 years, I mean, we have seen, I don't think there's any other way to describe it accurately than the sweeping rise of totalitarian regimes all across the Western world. This is a very scary prospect. What we're up against is no joke. And I mean, look, like zoom out for a second and think about what just happened in Canada, which they're trying to, kind of blow over now by having you focus on Ukraine. But you had a populist working class protest simply demanding liberty. Very clear on what their demands were. We want an end to the mandates. There was nothing more to it than that. Just a liberty movement demanding their liberty that was violently squashed by an authoritarian government, invoking unprecedented emergency powers, where they seized, with no due process, seized bank accounts of people who they alleged were involved. Were those people really involved? I don't know. Good luck proving it if you weren't. And even if they were to, I mean, how is that not a violation of basic rights? Now, that might be in Canada, one country to our north, but all the reports were that Joe Biden called Justin Trudeau and urged him to crack down on that protest. So anyway, the bigger picture I'm trying to paint here is we have an incredible opportunity. We're up against a very real threat. So what do we do in that situation? Well, I'd say the most important thing is to get our act together. And I will say that this is the time for the Libertarian Party to really get down to business. And for those libertarians out there, and I've heard some of them, and some people who are still members of the party who have responded to what, I said on about the Ukraine-Russia situation, have responded to me talking about the COVID regime. I've been told by other members of this party that I am repeating Putin talking points, and that I am siding with Vladimir Putin and supporting his war crimes. I just want to say, those type of attacks are the most despicable tactics of the corporate press, and they have no place in our movement. It's disgusting. I guess we're going to say that Harry Brown was an Al-Qaeda supporter. If that's the road we want to go down, we really want to destroy our own tradition to try to suck up to CNN. Now, I will say, and I know it's easy and it's fun to dunk on some of our more deranged critics in this party. But I know I'm a member of the Mises Caucus. I know that there are also people who aren't members of the Mises Caucus in this party who are just good libertarians. And given the opportunity that we have, and given what we're up against, I think we should all work together and unite and try to recreate a liberty movement like we had under Ron Paul. I'm not in this to hate other libertarians. I love libertarians. I love left-wingers who are good on like one issue. Yep. Like, you hear like Jimmy Dore say something about war, and you're like, this guy's awesome. Yep. And he's bad on everything else, but he's good on that one issue. You're like, I love this guy. Can you imagine, like, if you heard the worst, like right-wing nationalist populist, and he goes, we really got to end the Fed. You'd be like, hell yeah, dude. Like, these guys are awesome. So if I like people who are just good on a few issues, I love other libertarians. I want us all to be together, but that's only going to happen if we don't kind of allow for a culture where people are called the most despicable names and all of this stuff. So if we can reject that stuff, then I'm happy to work with everybody else and make something incredible to happen. Which I genuinely believe we can do. I think One of the splits, and I'll wrap on this, and then maybe we have time for some questions after that, but I think that one of the major splits that I see between the libertarians in the Mises Caucus and those outside of the Mises Caucus who are critical, and I don't mean just like the deranged, crazy ones. Like, I just mean reasonable libertarians. I think there's lots of reasonable libertarians who aren't in the Mises Caucus and are like, oh, I don't know, there's things I don't like about them, you know? And we have our flaws just like everybody else. But one of the major fundamental divides that I've seen, and I get this, like people will admit this, it's not like I'm just deducing that they feel this way. People will say things to me, like they'll go, well, yeah, Dave, I mean, if you run, the corporate press is gonna have a field day with clips of yours and the jokes you've made and politically incorrect views that you have and all of this stuff. And my response to that is good. I hope they do. Please. I will any day of the week have a battle with our mouthpieces for war criminals over whether they should be morally outraged with jokes that I've made. I welcome that fight. But I do understand on the surface where some libertarians feel like, you know, this is kind of what people in our camp call the blue pill, red pill divide, but whether you like that terminology or not, I understand on the surface where you could look at this and say, well, I mean, if the entire corporate press is calling you an awful racist, homophobe, bigot, Nazi, then everyone's gonna think we're awful racist, homophobe, bigot, Nazis, you know? So like I understand on the surface where you could feel that way, but my take on it is like this, okay? If we are ever anywhere near doing something successful, it is a guarantee that the corporate press will call us bigot, homophobe, racist, Nazis. That's a guarantee. It doesn't matter that we're not. Have we not learned this yet? That's what's going to happen. So we have two choices. And it's this much of a binary. We can try to avoid being called mean names and give up now. And we will never do anything, never accomplish anything. Or we can accept that we're going to be called those names, say, I don't care, bring it, and we're going to tell the truth like Ron Paul and Harry Bradley. That's my vision for the Libertarian Party. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate you having me. All right, I'm going to bring Tom back up. We got another microphone here. I don't know how much time we got a little bit of time. So we will now take questions.